The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz along with my co-host Tony Palmeri. On this edition we're very pleased to be joined by Winnebago County Sheriff Mike Brooks, who most of you I think probably know, and he's graced our set in the past. We're also pleased to welcome Captain Geoff Anderson to the program. He is also with the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department. Captain Anderson runs the 911 Center, correct?
Right.
All right. Well, thanks very much to both of you for being here tonight. There's a lot of ground that we want to cover during the next 60 minutes, but I guess one of the first things we should just get out of the way right away, probably not the first thing that you want to talk about, but,
Actually it is.
Okay, great. Then we're going to do it. This made news in early July that there was a budget shortfall for wages in your department to the tune of $818,000. Now, you know, some people feel that you and the department's accountant are solely responsible for that. Others think that you know, the responsibility of that falls not only on you folks, but on the county board as well, and the county executive, which at that time I guess was Jane Vandehei when this occurred. You know, whoever is to blame, something obviously happened and should not have. Can you explain for the viewers, Sheriff, what happened and why?
Sure. It's not as easy as one would think to explain it. You need to understand the process, first of all. But before you even go into that, let me say one thing.
Sure. I
am ultimately responsible for anything that occurs in the Winnebago County Sheriff's Office. I don't care if if somebody made a mistake that's a patrol officer or an accountant. I am ultimately the one who's responsible for that. So for me to sit and try and slide the blame to somebody else would be wrong. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it's my responsibility. That's what I was elected to do. And I will tell you that if you take a look at my budget over the years, I have been very, very proud of my budget because we've worked very hard to make sure that we weren't taking any more tax dollars out of people's pockets than we absolutely had to. What happened here is that a year ago, May, roughly in that time, we get some forms from the finance department that tells us what the current wages are for the staffing and what the projected wages are for the staffing. What appears to have happened, from the best I can tell, is the fact that some of the vacancies were not factored in, that were vacant at that time because of turnover, were not factored in, and that's why we ended up short for this coming year. I will dispute the $818,000. It's hard for me to do that because that figure came from my mouth. And what happened was, at a county board meeting, excuse me, at a committee meeting, I talked about we were going to be regular pay short. And that's the area that we're responsible for. That's the area that I'm ultimately responsible for. We also know that fringe benefits are going to be short. And part of the problem with the fringe benefits is that a lot of the numbers that are important don't come until late in the year. And as far as I know, we've always had problems countywide with fringe benefits. What I told the county, the committee, was that worst case scenario, potentially between the two, it could be $818,000. At the time that I said it, I regretted saying it because I really didn't think it was going to be that amount of money. And ultimately, as we've taken a look at where our budget is going, the regular pay is not going to be anywhere near what I projected it to be.
What will it be?
Well, here's the number I can give you right now. After 1 year, we have spent, one half of a year, we have spent 51.9% of our regular pay. Mm-hmm. Okay. We should have spent 50%. If you take a look at that budget, that comes out nowhere near in the area of $818,000. I do believe we're going to have a shortfall, and I do believe it'll be somewhere in the area of $180,000 plus, and I want to reiterate, plus the accrual that takes place at the end of the year. What a lot of people don't realize is that at the very end of the year, there's an overlap of the pay period, and that doesn't get charged back until the following year. So that accrual, plus I think roughly in the area of about $180,000 is where we're going to be short. Nowhere near what I said the worst case scenario could be.
Sure.
Ultimately, though, I have to take the responsibility for it. That's what I'm elected to do. Unfortunately, I'm very disappointed in myself that it occurred. As I said in the newspaper and as I've told other people, I've always been very proud of the fact that my budget has always been very, very close, in many years within 1% of what we budgeted, because I've often said, as a matter of fact, one of the reasons why I ran was budgets at that time were overinflated, and I never thought that was right. I didn't ever think we should be taking money from people that we didn't actually know we're going to need. So there's been cuts in my budgets throughout the entire career, or my 11 years as sheriff. I'm proud of the fact that I was looking for ways to cut my budget before there was a financial crisis and before it became in vogue to do that. But what I'm going to be remembered for is the headline on the newspaper, which I can't say that didn't come out of my mouth, but it was a worst case with regular pay that I'm responsible for and the fringe benefits.
Well, you did announce, Mike, lots of things that you were going to do to offset the shortfall. So are you still going to do all those things, even though it sounds like it's not as high as 800,000 now?
Well, we have started doing some of those, and there's a couple of things that we've done. And the
Not
first,
filling all vacant positions?
we have filled all but 5 officers that have retired through the course of the year. Right now, we have 5 openings, and there's 3 openings, and there's 2 reasons why I'm not going to fill that. Number one is we need to assure ourselves that we minimize the impact as much as we can. Secondly, we don't know where we're going to be with state prisoners next year. We lose the state prisoners, we have to close a pod. I made a commitment to the county board when we started the state prisoners that I would get rid of the officers that were hired for that, either through attrition or through a layoff. It appears at this point the officers will be able to be taken care of through attrition because we eliminated 2 last year, we're eliminating 3 this year. I am going to ask the county exec to keep a nurse that we have and a booking clerk that we have that were hired at the time we took on the state prisoners.
We appreciate that you're sitting here, Mike, taking responsibility for this error, but how can you assure the viewers that county government is in control? I mean, you've got an accountant, you look at the numbers, at least 1 county board committee, maybe 2, a county executive, everyone misses this. So how can you assure viewers that the county is competent?
Well, let me say, I can't speak for the county exec or the county board or my committee. Ultimately, it's my responsibility to take it back to them and bring them accurate numbers. The only thing I can tell the taxpayers, and I always like to point out, I'm a taxpayer before I'm sheriff too, so this bothers me too, and I don't want to see this continue on. But we have changed the way we have done the budgeting. We're doing an actual budgeting. We are doing accounting for every single position, and if it's vacant, we do an analysis as to whether or not we did an analysis as to whether or not we were going to fill it. If so, we put the money in there. If not, we didn't put any money in there. It really boils down to the fact that you have to become more detail-oriented, and that's the route I'm going. How can they feel assured? Once again, over 10 years as the sheriff, I've done many things to cut the budget. My budget has been right on, with the exception of the year that we started housing prisoners out of state, and then last year when we had some just an enormous housing of prisoners at hospitals for other types of illnesses, and we had to guard them. So the only thing I can tell them is, in the past, I've got a record that I stand on, and I have taken steps to make sure this doesn't happen again.
But you also were telling the county, I believe, at the Judiciary Committee on April 13th, that we should look at increasing pay for certain captains.
Right.
Are you advocating that?
I do believe that at some point we have to start paying the people according to what we pay other department heads. Currently, the other department heads, or the seconds in commands and the administrators in the other departments are on a pay for performance. And the captains in the sheriff's office aren't. And I don't think that's fair. I've got a captain that runs a division with 9 people and a budget of $653,000. I also have a captain that runs a division with 100 people and a budget of about $5.5 million. They get paid the same. That shouldn't be. So what I'm saying, and if you take a look at these captains, they've fallen behind their counterparts throughout the county. So what I have said is, look, in fairness to these people, you need to compensate them accordingly based on the Hayes study, just like you do everybody else.
Okay, Cheryl?
The Sheriff's Department is the only county department that does have its own accountant, as far as what I've been able to kind of see so far.
Right.
Is that in fact correct? And if so, why would the Sheriff's Department have its own accountant?
It's not correct. Parkview has their own accountant, so
Okay.
does social services. The larger departments have an accountant. The way we got an accountant, once again, when I became sheriff, we did a study of our staffing levels, and we took a look at a couple of clerical positions and said they're basically doing the same job as an accountant without any degree or any experience. So I went to Bill Wagner, then the county personnel director, and said, I think it makes more sense to bring an accountant into an operation this big.
Okay.
We went to our committee, went to personnel and finance, and that's how we ended up with an accountant.
Okay.
But I should say that the other departments had their accounts before us too.
Okay, all right.
Just one last thing on the budget, Mike. I noticed that you want to raise your medical budget due to an aging jail population. How big of a problem is this?
Tremendous problem. Captain Anderson, who had worked in the jail prior to his current position, will tell you that with an aging jail population, the same problems that you and I have as we age start to occur, and we are responsible when they are in our custody to take care of those types of things. Now, I want to point out, when we look at this, we don't, a lot of people say they're getting Cadillac of services, and that's not true. We do an evaluation. I'm required by case law and statute to provide medical assistance, and I'm required to meet a need, not a want, but a need. And the basic test is, will we do more harm by not addressing it than if we do address it? And that makes the determination as to whether or not it is a need versus a want. Let me use as an example of last year. We had a horrific accident out on Highway 41 in front of Kmart. A gentleman crossed over in the median and hit a woman head-on, killed her. He had significant injuries to his ankle that, had they not been attended to, he would have never been able to walk again.
Right.
He's in my custody. Obviously, we don't want to let him go. He's facing felony charges, homicide, vehicular homicide. So the responsibility comes upon us to take care of that. We're seeing a lot more blood pressure medication. We're seeing a lot more cholesterol medication. We're seeing a lot of health problems from people who traditionally don't take good care of themselves. And now, as they've gotten older, you're seeing the downside of that, and they're in our jail, and we have that obligation to take care of them.
But shouldn't the counties be doing more to get the state to take over this cost? I mean, the county taxpayers are being asked to shoulder, I think, an increasingly heavy burden for what I really think is a state responsibility. Do you agree?
I don't know if I agree that running the jail is a state responsibility. I believe that still very clearly by statute and by Constitution is the responsibility of the county to do that. The Supreme Court, in a case, I wish I could remember the site, I just remember the beginning part was Rivera, says it is the responsibility of the sheriff once that relationship is established, which means once he comes in there. Do I think it's in the right place right now? Yeah. Do I think that we would be served by eliminating some of the unfunded mandates that are drawing the money? That's true, but it is a mandate by Constitution and by state law that I take care of the inmates.
Sure.
I want to touch on just a little bit longer this medical issue. When folks come into the jail, and either one of you can answer this really, I'm sure that some of them are covered by medical insurance. If it's someone who is still perhaps on their parents' medical plan, maybe a woman who's covered under a husband's, whatever the case may be. When they're incarcerated in your jail, if they have health insurance, does the county still have to pay for their health care, or does it fall on their health insurance provider?
It absolutely,
when we admit an inmate, we do a medical intake screening form, and on that form is the question, do you have health coverage or do you have medical assistance? Absolutely, if the answer is yes, or if we find that card while we search their wallet, an insurance card or a medical assistance card, that individual pays for their own care.
Okay.
And just as an example, last summer, well, first of all, if they're on Medicaid, medical aid, not Medicaid, if they're on medical aid, then it's not covered. We end up picking it, but we get it at Medicaid rates, so there's a reduction. But just last summer, for example, we had a little under $10,000, somewhere in the $9,000 range, medical bill from an individual who was going through a divorce, but yet was still covered by his wife's health insurance, and we went after that and got that.
Okay.
So we take that responsibility seriously.
Good.
Should we get to Geoff?
Sure.
If I could just add one
Yeah.
more thing, and I say this only because this doesn't diminish the problem as it came to the budget, but I did want to say one thing. I've had a lot of people talk to me and say, well, we've lost $818,000, and that's not true. We have not lost any money. We've not used any taxpayers' dollars that we're actually obligated to use to pay the wages. So it's not a city, and this doesn't make it any better, but for people that are out there listening, I want them to understand that this was not $818,000 that was lost. It was an obligation that was not budgeted for, and there is a difference there. It still doesn't diminish the fact that a mistake was made.
Okay, all right. The 911 Center, and we'll talk about other Sheriff's Department issues as well, but there was recently a lot of discussion on this show's website about the 911 Center and whether or not smoking ban violations should be called in to 911. And I personally talked to the sheriff about this. He's indicated that calling 911 is not an appropriate use of that service for smoking ban violations. But, it seems kind of self-explanatory. But why don't you just explain to people, because everybody has a different idea of what an emergency is.
That's correct.
Why don't you tell folks what the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department views as an emergency and a proper use for 911?
Well, I think your premise on the question is exactly on the mark, is that we can set our own ideas, but it is truly the people we serve to call on what they think 911 should be. We take calls, barking dogs, broken down vehicles, 911, because that is what that citizen thinks they need to do. We then educate that person after we take that call and direct the services that they're requesting, and then educate them on truly what we think 911 is. So that being said, it's not black and white, but it's an emergency. It's life and death, it's injury, it's accident with road blockage, it's injury to people, it's ambulance calls, it's fires, it's it's one of those, when you see it, but kind of hard to describe, and that's what we try to tell people.
So someone has a heart attack, that's a clear 911,
Clear.
right?
Yes.
But someone trips and falls and bruises themselves.
And then there's so many different factors in that. Is that an 85-year-old person,
Right,
or is
exactly.
that a teenager who's
Right.
skateboarding, for example?
Interestingly enough, we would, and as Cheryl said, we had a long conversation about this, but we would prefer people, if there's any doubt in their mind, we would prefer that they call 911. But one of the questions that came up was, what is the difference and what is the concern? And the biggest concern is that we only have 8 dedicated trunk lines for 911 calls. And if we have an incident, a large incident, and we'll get into this in a minute when we start talking about wireless 911, and I hope we get an opportunity to talk about that at length. But you can tie up those lines very, very quickly, and that's when we're concerned about somebody who has a obvious medical emergency not being able to get help. So, that's why we ask people if it isn't life-threatening or isn't a medical emergency or the potential for that, please call the administrative number.
One of the things that I personally was surprised to learn is that the 911 center operators are also taking non-emergency calls for policing agencies that maybe, unlike Oshkosh, they're not open 24 hours a day. I am assuming that you have, if somebody calls their local police office and it happens to go into your department, I'm assuming it comes in on a non-dedicated 911 line, so your operators can distinguish the emergency calls from those non-emergency calls.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct. They know by their computer screen readout. The 911 call also generates a anti-alley, automatic location indicator, and automatic name indicator, so that it shows on another screen, so we know that's a 911 call. We see that on the computer as a 911 or a non-911 call. And so you're absolutely correct in that Amro, Winnebago Police Departments, for example, the Sheriff's Office, we have always, for the Sheriff's Office, always taken our non-emergency 911 calls. Used to be at our complaint desk at the old safety building, and then at a point even prior to leaving the safety building, we took those calls downstairs to streamline that operation. So we do know the difference between the calls, and we do take those calls, the non-emergency calls, for Town of Menasha Police Department at time additionally.
Okay. Want to just stay on some of these emergency calls for a moment. Shortly after the Neenah Menasha fire departments consolidated into one department, there were some snafus, and unfortunately, one of those snafus resulted in a man's death. Maybe you can just kind of briefly tell viewers what happened and what steps were taken to correct that problem, because didn't it have to do with when the address pops up on the 911 screen, they weren't sure what was going on? Tell folks about that.
Sure. What happened was we received that 911 call, and as I stated earlier, we get a screen that shows the name and address of that caller, and that's called Enhanced 911, and that leads into some of our discussion for later. And the enhanced part gives us that location, tells us it's not necessarily who the caller is, but it's who pays the bill at that phone number at that residence. And the name is less important than that location, because sometimes people don't know where they really are. Babysitters on babysitting, but not knowing the address, but we now at least know where they are. So that being said, what occurred was in the cities of Neenah Menasha, there are Second the number street, and there is SECOND Street. And
I didn't know that either.
yes,
Alphabetical and numerical.
yes. The address that came up, I forget which way it was right now, but irregardless, the subscriber has some accountability when you make your request for phone service and you call SBC or you call your local phone company. We need to be very specific. What occurred was the city for that street number was incorrect, and we sent the ambulance to the wrong city. Had the same house number on 123 2nd Street, but it was in the wrong city. So to correct that, and that was the first time that's occurred that we were aware of in the history of Winnebago County 911. To correct that, we immediately got a hold of SBC, who was responsible and paid for, or is paid to maintain that 911 database by a surcharge on all of our home telephone bills, to do an audit of every 911 subscriber listing that they had in their database for Winnebago County. And they were very receptive. They worked with us very well to do that. They identified errors. Those were corrected. And we have instituted a yearly audit that we will do beginning, it's kind of interesting that with Dr. Palmeri here, we will do the audit the second week of September every year. And the reason for that is to, once all the college students get back to town and get their cell or their phone service back established, we don't want to do it any prior to that. And then September 10th, there's 5,000 new subscribers, and those don't know how many errors could be, but we do it so the second week in September every year we will have an audit done through SBC and all the local phone companies in our county.
So one city has second, for example, with the number, and the other city has it written out.
That's correct.
Well, that's just stupid.
Well, and if I could just add to that, though, it's a very unique situation because what creates the problem is the fact that they share the same telephone exchanges, and that is what helped create the problem. We also have a very similar situation with Ave and Street in the village of Winnebago, and so what we did is we went and programmed the system to alert the 911 operator to make sure that they get the correct address from the person. It still boils down to the fact that you cannot rely on that any-alley information 100%, because, for example, if you move tomorrow and you're with SBC, we may have it in the computer by tomorrow night, but if you're with and I'm not going to use any other companies.
Sure.
If you're with one of the other companies, we may not have it correctly in the computer until Monday or even as late as next Friday. So it's important for us, when there's an emergency going, people don't want to be answering questions. They just want to tell us what the emergency is, but we need to know where to send people. And so that's a starting point.
My own personal opinion is that the person who answers the 911 call probably has the most difficult job in all of law enforcement. And I don't think that's an exaggeration.
No, it's not.
So let's just hypothetical scenario, 911 call, woman calls up, my husband just collapsed, I think he's having a heart attack. Mm-hmm. She's obviously very upset. What is that 911 operator trained to do in a situation like that?
We have a nationally established protocol called Emergency Medical Dispatch that is computer software that in the past our dispatchers are trained to ask the who, what, and where, and whys and get as much information as they can. Now we have this software program, Emergency Medical Dispatch, that directs the dispatcher to enter the call, and it assigns it a level of priority, and with that level of priority, in that instance, a person falling, it goes to a screen where a series of questions are right in front of the dispatcher to ask the individual to obtain all the necessary information that is then relayed to the fire department.
Well, this is a big advance over the old days, right?
Yes.
In the old days, you didn't have the prompt.
Correct. It also assigns the level of response for the fire department. Right. So now we'll see ambulance driving through town. We don't know that they're necessarily on a call because it's not necessary. Mm-hmm. There's liability with ambulances driving a red light and siren to calls that it's not necessary. Right. Police officers driving a red light and siren and at high speeds, that it's not necessary at times. We all used to do it. Sheriff and I, we were patrolmen. We all drove as fast as we could to get to everything. It's not necessary at times. And if I could add just one other thing that we have done to ensure that these errors will not happen again is and later on I'd like to talk about the expectations, the reliability, what people, how we depend on our experiences and hardware, software. Dispatchers got so used to seeing that name and address on their computer screen and depending on that, that we now mandate and through policy that they verify the address and verify the city that the people are in to ensure that doesn't occur again.
That goes back to almost your question. That's almost the first thing that they do, obviously, is verify to make sure that they know where to send the rescue personnel. So.
Well, that's really important too, because so many people now, students in particular, are using cell phones as their primary residential
absolutely.
phone. They're just simply not having landline phones installed in huge volumes these days.
Right.
You know, it's just not happening. So, and I don't think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure that technology is that far advanced yet where every 911 call that's made from a cell phone is actually showing up with a location of where they are.
Not
Is
yet.
it?
No.
Not yet.
It's coming, though.
It's coming.
Yeah, it's,
Right.
and I'll turn this over to Geoff, but I just want to say one thing. People expect when they call us and 911 dispatcher answers, they expect us to know where they're at. And I just pointed out that expectation, even with a wired line, can be wrong. You know, because if you've moved recently or whatever, it's going to be even worse with wireless. And it's very important for people to understand what the accuracy rates are and the importance of being able to tell us what's going on and where they're at. And I'd just like to point out one little thing, and then Geoff really is very well versed on this. If you have a cell phone and you don't have a wired line and you live at 230 Westmore Road and I'm on the other side of the duplex at 250 and Tony lives at 256 and Geoff lives at 260, that accuracy, that's about the best it's going to give us on that cell phone, is that it's in one of those 4 houses. So the expectations, or if you call and you're on the 6th floor of a building, it may tell us at that building, but it's not going to tell us where you are.
Okay.
And the responsibilities that we have are going to require us to even be more diligent in getting as much information up front, which is very frustrating to people. But if Geoff could just talk a little bit about where we are and and how long before we'll be up and running, maybe that will help too.
Sure.
Certainly. Just quick history. As 1985, I have data from the cell phone industry, 340,000 cell phones in our country in 85. In 2004, 182 million cell phones in our country. So as that number has grown, so has the expectations of that user that cell phone is just like the phone they have in their house.
Right.
And if we recall back our own personal use, we started with a cell phone, and then we started to ask for features. We wanted caller ID. We wanted voicemail on our cell phones. So we started with these features that we wanted, just like on our landline phone. And the next step is now people want and expect 911 services just like they get on their cell phone at home, or their landline phone at home. So that being said, back in the early to mid 90s, the FCC, communication professionals in the law enforcement and emergency service world, along with cell providers, started to recognize that we need to provide that expected service to their customers and to all our customers. So the FCC came out with some mandates that by certain dates that cellular 911, wireless 911 be implemented. So for example, there's the FCC mandated, and the state of Wisconsin passed a statute back in 2004, and the Public Service Commission promulgated the rules late 2004 that started the ball rolling in Wisconsin. And it's not a mandated, however, it certainly is what our citizens expect from us, and certainly we need to provide to them. But for example, the phase-in for there's 2 types. If I can describe briefly the 2 types of how we will locate cell phones and how we will locate that individual is a network-based solution where when we call 911 from our cell phone, if we have network-based technology in our phone, it'll send a signal to 3 cell towers, and then those 3 cell towers will triangulate that individual caller and send that signal back to my 911 center, and then we'll plot that on our map, a computer-generated map, and we'll have a rough idea. And when I say rough idea, I'll explain what I mean by that. We'll have a pretty good idea where that person is. And there's also GPS-based wireless 911. Some, and the majority of cell phones, but not all of them, by 2000 and
End of this year, I thought.
December 31st of 2005, 95% of cell phones that are sold must contain a GPS chip in them that automatically, when you call 911, sends that up to the GPS satellites, sends that to the local 911 center and translate that into an address. But that's, I think, there's one of our numbers. 95% of those phones have to have it in. The other 5% don't have to have anything. So 5% of the phones you buy from the store might not have any technology in to send that signal back to us.
How did those 5% get exempt?
By the FCC regulations.
Okay.
Any idea why they
No,
would not
I-
make it 100%? And is there a plan in place to make it 100% at some point?
I don't know why, and I know the National Emergency Number Association and the Association of Public Communication Officers are working with the FCC to make that 100%.
Okay.
Then in addition to that, if I can I'll just continue real quickly.
Sure.
The accuracy that is mandated under the FCC guidelines is with the handset technology that they have to be reliable to 100 meters for 67% of the calls and 300 meters for 95% of the calls.
So now you know what I'm talking about, the 4 houses.
Right.
Yes.
You know, we may get your address, but we may knock at your door and you say, huh?
Right.
And it could be
By up to
next door.
350 meters. The
So
GPS based is 50 meters. It's more confined because it's a better technology. It's closer. 50 meters for 67%, 150 meters for 95% of the calls. So that is better technology, and so I guess I would suggest if people are all shopping for new cell phones, they ask for a GPS-based wireless 911 phone, and make sure it is installed with that chip.
GPS-based, or what was the other one that you had mentioned?
Handset-based.
Handset-based. But you're suggesting that GPS is probably the better of the two?
Yes, yes. It's required to have a shorter range and
that
a
is-
higher percentage.
Right, and it's based on the fact that it's a close, the accuracy is a much smaller area than with the handheld base.
But good rule of thumb, I guess, and the moral of this story is whether you've got GPS-based technology, handset-based technology, or even you're calling from a wired line, know where you're at so that you can relay that information to the 911 operator.
If you can, absolutely correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Has the growth, Geoff, you know, you mentioned that in the last 20 years, the amount of cell phones have skyrocketed. Has that correlated with an increase in 911 calls?
Oh, tremendously. Just over 60% of the 911 calls we receive now at our Winnebago County 911 Center are cell phones.
60%?
Yes, yep, 60%. Years ago, if we had a bad accident, we got a call from the neighbors who heard it outside their house, one phone call. Today, especially on the highways in 41, bad accident, we'll get 30, 40 phone calls on that same incident. So the volume is tremendously increased.
Well, how has this affected I'll call it the burnout factor, the morale of the dispatchers? Because I imagine their job has gotten more difficult, has it not?
It certainly has. Fortunately, the majority of those 40, 50 calls are very quick calls, saying someone's on the line, I want to report a car, a bad accident. Is it a semi in a car in front of Bergstrom? Yes, okay, thank you, click.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
Yeah, so, but there are instances where we do gain valuable information from those additional phone calls. It could be witnesses. It could be someone down the road that semi-swerved, that car did something that our officers aren't aware of. So we don't just cut them off and say thanks and hang up. If there's information that they can provide us, we surely want to get it.
Quite a few years ago, long before this technology was going to be available, we went to caller ID for cell phones, and once again it was because of the fact that if an incident occurs and we don't get a statement from the person, he may have valuable information. But let me go back to the problem with the phone calls. There's a couple issues there. Number one is you have a limited amount of trunks. You have a limited amount of people that can answer the calls. So the question comes, and we just had this incident occur out on Vinland Road, a bad accident, and so many calls came in such a short period of time that people that were calling 911 were getting a busy signal.
Wow.
Now, the problem with that is, what do we want them to do? Do we want them to get a busy signal, or do we want the phone to continue to ring, 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 and ring because we don't have enough staff to handle it? The general feeling is that you would rather have the busy signal, because if it's ring, 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 what happens is people wait too long before they redial, whereas if they get the busy signal, they'll redial back and we'll get to them quicker. But we also have a recording of all those phone calls. And we go back, and there was a woman who lives on Vinland who made a phone call to us, and within 2 minutes we had a call back to her her house. So we try and recognize what the limitations are, and then we try and plan accordingly to make sure that we don't miss things.
Okay. If someone does make a call and it is busy, they will get called back?
They're supposed to get called back as quickly as possible, and in most situations, we're able to call back within less than 2 minutes. I still suggest to people that they hang up and call again. It doesn't hurt, and we'll get back to them anyway. But it still doesn't hurt for them to call right away.
What are the penalties for crank 911 calls? Is there anything in statutes for that?
Yes, and I apologize for not remembering what it is. It's a misdemeanor for making a false call, and we take them very seriously because we do know that there have been instances where a call's been made and there was something going on, and when we called back, we get the one I can think of right off the top of my head is domestic abuse, and all of a sudden we get one of the spouses saying, "Oh no, we never called her; it was an accident." And so we follow up on those. So that's why these crank 911 phone calls we take very seriously, and we do push.
I know your dispatchers have a lot of instructions on their screen, but are they trained in how to communicate interpersonally?
Yes.
For example, when someone you must get a ton of domestic violence calls. It's sad, but it occurs. They're trained on how to keep someone on the line and calm them down?
Yes.
Do they get that training in school before they get hired, or do they get it once they're there?
It depends. It depends where they come from.
Okay.
There is a telecommunicator program down at Marine Park in Beaver Dam. Unfortunately, that hasn't been as successful as I would like it to see. That's professional training right up front, and hire that individual with all the skills that they would bring with them. But unfortunately, like I said, that hasn't occurred and been as successful as it was. So we train our people into that, into how to talk to people. We have yearly in service where that's always a topic. A handful of my dispatchers are hostage negotiators. They have those skills. They have the training. Dispatchers are kind of obvious statement here, but terrific communicators.
Yeah.
They know how to talk to people. They bring that with them. We look for that when we hire them. So they're just terrific hostage negotiators. They can relate to people, they get into people, they can sympathize and empathize with people, and they know how to talk to them. And they share those skills with their peers.
We also, if I could just add to that, when we do the background, that's a major thing we look for, is their ability to communicate, how they handle stress. We also we find that some of the best dispatchers come from occupations where they have to multitask, because that is a large part.
Okay. We're going to move on to some other issues. Is that okay?
Sure.
We can come back to that if you want, but
Sure.
we want some other
Sure.
issues. Mike, there's been a proposal in the legislature this year to move the speed limit up to 75. I can't imagine you support that.
No, as a matter of fact, I've gotten myself in trouble more than once suggesting that
we should lower it.
Yeah.
Well, I support that. I
In
think we
certain
should
areas.
lower it.
Yeah. There's all kinds of statistical data that shows that for every 10 miles an hour above that speed limit, your chances of an accident increase, but even more so, a tremendous increase in the potential for personal injury or death. And so I've always been a big proponent of saying that we need to slow things down, not speed them up. Where the highway's appropriate, I have no problem with 65. I just feel that some of the areas right now, until they are changed, need to go to 55, but I don't believe 75 up and down this corridor, even when we go to 6 lanes here, would be appropriate.
I think it's insane, personally.
Yeah, well, I do too. Although I will say, we just got back from a vacation out on the East Coast, and in a lot of places along the way, the speed limit is 75, and you know, people seem to be holding that limit a little bit, and they seem to be driving safely. But I think, too, you set the limit at one thing, and people always think they've got
Agreed.
that little bit of window before an officer will give them a ticket,
Right.
and they're just going to keep going faster and faster. And,
That's right.
you know, and around here, with our roads the way they are, they're not always in the best shape.
That's correct.
So,
Even if they are, once again, whether it's working well out east or out west, the stats still show that your potential for harm is much greater.
sure.
Different issue, the issue of stun guns or tasers.
Yes,
We do have them in the county.
yes, we do.
And as you know, there's been a tremendous movement nationwide to place a moratorium on the use of them. Lots of people want to ban them. You think they're valuable?
I believe they have a place. As a matter of fact, when this first started coming to light, we once again started reviewing. Lieutenant Lautenschlager, who's our training officer, went out and started gathering information. We revised our policy on when they can be used, when they can't be used. And once again, we talked about obvious scenarios. Somebody 85 years old, somebody 6 years old, obviously not appropriate. We tell the officers they need to be aware of potential medical issues before they use it. But it is on that continuum and does have a valuable use as far as less than lethal force.
The Law Enforcement Standards Board recently came out with a set of guidelines.
Yes.
I think the most important part of what the guidelines, they said, is to define active resistance.
Right.
How do you define that?
Well, I think once again we need to take a look at. I'm very fond of using the Supreme Court's rule or a phrase of the totality of the circumstances. Somebody who is just sitting there clenched up, I find that hard to be active resistance.
Right.
On the same token, if the person is holding something close to their mouth and it may be of a danger to them, and you have a fear, then that may be appropriate. The vast majority of the time, though, it is very clear. It is an overt physical reaction to fight, and that's the most appropriate use for it when it would fall in that continuum that we have that says, here's the right spot for it.
But I have read, Mike, that the Department of Homeland Security, the two largest law enforcement divisions of Homeland Security, have rejected the use of stun guns for about 20,000 agents and officers. Now, if Department of Homeland Security is rejecting it, shouldn't local county sheriff offices reject them?
Well, first of all, you're telling me something I wasn't aware of. I have not seen anything from them that has said that.
I read that in the USA Today.
Yeah, and I'll look to see what their reasoning behind it is. There may be many different reasons why they don't use it.
Well, they said questions about the safety of the devices, and well, that's basically it, the safety. And I believe about 90 people have been killed.
I'm not aware of that number. What I'm aware of is, and the one I'm really aware of is more of a situation involving the officers that have been injured as a result of using it. The case started first with a Maricopa County Sheriff's deputy who received a back injury as the result of the use. He already had some health issues, some back problems, and it was inappropriate to ask him to voluntarily take a hit with the stun gun. But what I have seen doesn't indicate that anything can be directly attributed to the use of the stun gun in the death of any of these individuals. But there have been injuries, and obviously as the result of that, we're very careful how we use them. But it's a balancing test again.
Sure.
What type of force are we going to use to use the least amount of force, but yet to resolve the situation? And that's why it does have an appropriate place, at least from our perspective.
Okay.
How often have your officers used them since they've been brought into the department?
I'm not aware of us. Oh, since we brought in the department, I was anticipating your question,
See?
but I caught myself. I would say we're probably, and I'd be guessing, I would say we're probably in the area of 10 to 15 times. Most often it's been in the jail, in corrections where we have a combatant inmate. But it has been used on the streets. But since this has occurred, we've not had an incident of it being used.
How long has your department been using them?
Boy, I'd have to go back. I want to say somewhere in the area of about 1999, 2000. the OC and the stun gun came as the result of my saying, I want to have a less than lethal force that we can use, but I want one that the chances of somebody being killed is very, very small. And that, right now, to be quite frank with you, still appears, when you look at all the data, still appears to be the least likely to do permanent harm.
Okay.
Mike, can you talk a little bit about the drug court program? I know that you've been a very, very strong advocate of this. Where is it? And why did it take us so long to get to this? It seems like a common sense thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Interestingly enough, many of the programs that are affiliated with that have been in my budget over the years and have been cut for one reason or another, financial issues oftentimes. But the drug court has had a lot of success. It's something we should have been going to. Getting the support.
Well, just to back up what you're saying, Dakota County, Minnesota, more than twice the size of Winnebago County, but its jail population averages 1/3 fewer inmates because they have a drug court program.
There's no doubt, and it's interesting. Let me go back. The very first time proposed in my budget, it came as a result of meetings with people that were running the program for Dakota County. So we're going back to about 1995. That's how we ended up going to Dakota County. Is that as I, it took me a long time to get any support for this internally. And once Judge Wolt came on board, he grasped onto it like a bulldog and said, we need to go there. So that's why we sent people up to Dakota County, including Judge Wolt, the District Attorney Bill Lennon, and we went up and looked at those. Where we are right now, we've applied for a grant. We have not heard back yet as to whether or not we've got the grant. There is a training that is necessary to go, or that we believe is necessary to go through in order to make this work. We have hired the county's hired a drug coordinator, a drug court coordinator to help with the programs that these individuals will be placed on, to evaluate, to make sure that they're following them, to evaluate the success on them, to report back to the court. So we are starting to move forward. It's going to be a slow process.
How do you answer the argument that you hear in some circles that this is a soft on crime approach?
Well, it's not anything but soft on crime. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. You get sentenced to 3 years in prison. We send you to prison for 3 years, and you say, I don't care, I'm not going to do anything about it. Now we spend about $30,000 a year to keep you in prison, so we spend $90,000, you come back out and you reoffend. Hopefully, what we're going to do with this is we're going to catch these people a little sooner, long before they make that trip to the prison, and we're going to make them even more accountable for their day-to-day actions than they were or would be under any other provision. They're going to be mandated to be in court once a week or once every 2 weeks. They're going to be to have a face-to-face with the judge and that drug coordinator and any other person providing a service of a program. They're going to be held much more accountable, and I guarantee you they're going to be bounced in and out of my jail. And what we have seen, and not just in Dakota County and not just in La Crosse County, but what we see nationwide is it has a deterrent effect. It does reduce the recidivism.
Okay.
Let me talk about La Crosse. Looked like they would have to build another jail. They have actually gone down in their jail population. That's what we're after.
And this, to be clear with our audience, this is only for non-violent offenders.
Non-violent offenders, correct.
All right, Cheryl.
Jail population, you and I had talked a little bit about this when we last talked about 3 or 4 weeks ago, Sheriff, but one of the items that had been discussed a little bit on the Oshkosh website several months ago was the juveniles not being housed in Winnebago County, but instead being housed up in Outagamie County.
Correct.
And I believe it was at a rate of $80 per juvenile per day, and we reserve like a minimum of 10 beds per day or something like that. You explained it to me, but for the benefit of our viewers, can you explain why, when we've got this multi-million-dollar beautiful jail here, we don't house juveniles here? And if we have time, then I'll ask you another question.
well, first of all, let me say this. The office side of that jail with the red brick was an argument that we had whether or not we should do it. But the inside of the jail, you saw it, is not a beautiful jail. But after spending all that money, why don't we have juveniles here? Because, to be quite frank with you, we're required to keep them. The rules say we have to keep them separate. You can't even have the same staff. For example, you can't be a security officer for the men and also be a security officer for the juveniles. You have to be segregated to the juveniles or the adults. Plus, you have to have a backup to that person. So it's very staff intensive. There's requirements to have social workers and educators there. It becomes very, very expensive. When we first started looking at it, and at building that type of facility, we looked at about $121 a day, and at that time, if I remember correctly, we were at about $80 a day with the Outagamie County. Now, I can't tell you what the exact amount of the dollars are because it is not a part of the sheriff's office. It's run through social services, but I do know that the cost of housing them up in Outagamie County, including the transport, still is cheaper for the taxpayers of Winnebago County than it would be if we were to build our own facility and staff it and operate it. It's the building. I know everybody got worked up over our facility, but the building of the building is not your big cost, and I know people find that hard to believe. It's that life cycle, the continuing operation cost. It's the millions of dollars that get spent there that really create the problem. That's why this move that was made 7-8 years ago was a good move.
So is Outagamie County then losing money by housing juveniles?
No, because they're doing it for several groups, so they're able to keep it full all the time. See, that's the other thing, as you said, they have a larger size facility and they're able to keep it full, and they have the extra beds, so that's how they're making money on it.
Very quickly, Mike, we're running out of time. We still don't have video hookup, do we, between the courthouse and the jail?
No, we don't.
That's so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Between the courthouse, no.
Right. So we've been doing all this transport back and forth.
Okay.
A complete waste of money, right?
Yes, but let me. I answered your question, but let me add. We do have a hookup between the safety building, which is our court commissioner's office, and the jail, and that is about half of our transport
That's half
costs.
of it. Okay.
But you hit it right on the head. It caught. Once again, it's a very labor intensive, bringing people from court down here.
Security risk too.
Security risks, there's no doubt about it. We had them when we were just going even across the street because you were going through public hallways and public tunnels. But the technology's there now. My committee has approved it, and I'm hoping to be able to get the county board to approve putting in that video technology. We can do these 15-minute hearings with prisons and
Yeah, I mean, but has their argument been that we don't know what's going to happen with the courthouse?
that's been the argument.
All right. But the longer we wait, the more it's going to cost.
Yes.
Yeah, see,
And the more it costs us in the interim for personnel, gas, and cars.
that's government for you, right?
In about 30 seconds, is there anything that either of you would like to say to just summarize real quick?
I'll let you talk about 911, and I want to go back to the $818,000. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to people about this, and the only thing I can say is it is not a mistake that we will tolerate, and it won't happen again. But I want to thank you personally for allowing me to
You're
talk to the
entirely
citizens about that.
And thank you. And unfortunately, we don't have time
Oh.
to go back to Geoff. But
I'm sorry.
I want to thank both of you for being
You're
here.
welcome. Yeah.
And we'd love to have you back in the future.
Be glad to.
And we can talk about some of those other things then, too. And thanks to Tony, and of course, thanks to you folks for letting us into your homes. We'll see you next time. Until then, keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.